I found a framed illustration of this fly in a cigar shop in the restroom. Decided I just had to do it for real. So here it is. It's called the Ibis Mallard, and I can't find it in any of my books. This is an old hook, about a 1/0 that I had kicking around. I cut the eye off. It's very similar to the hook in the illustration. So I decided to go with it, and I've just basically made a blind eye hook out of it. This is some faux gut, and if you don't speak French, that's fake gut that I've made out of some leader material. And I'll show how to do that in another video. I'm not going to go through the process here, but I'm just binding it down underneath the hook all the way back to the bend. And notice how I've got it all wound up so that it's just easier for me to deal with. It doesn't get in the way as I wind on materials. I tied a perfection loop in the end of this before starting. It's important to do that ahead of time. There's a little bit of a cliff here at the end, and I'll take care of that over time as I add materials. Tying in the flat gold tinsel for the tag on the far side of the hook. Just pulling it to length there. I'm using GSP thread, so I'll bind it down with 8 wraps instead of my usual 5. It's just a little slipperier than cotton thread. And I'm taking 5 wraps back and 5 wraps forward, as is my custom. Always unwind the thread. I like to leave 1 turn left to hold the far tinsel down before I start binding everything forward, as I'm doing here. The tip of this hook extends quite a ways forward, so I'm trying to avoid it as I wrap. And now I'll just bind it down everything, and I always go all the way forward, and I'll speed up this next segment. Flattening the thread there. I like to build bodies with flattened thread. And this body, since this is going to be a display fly, I'm going to give it to the proprietor of the cigar shop. So anyway, I want a nice body on this. This is a left mallard slip. This is a left goose secondary slip that I'm cutting. I'm going to put them together and then marry them together and then trim them a bit. They're a little wide. You don't want, for the width of the tail, you don't want any more than about 6 strands on any of these old flies. So I'm going to strip out some fibers here, and this will make up the near tail. And don't strip off any more than a fiber or 2. You're not dealing with too many fibers here, so 1 fiber makes a big difference. You don't want to go too far with it. So there's the near tail. And now I'm going to use rights to make up the far tail. And I work from the back of the feather. So this may appear to be a left because I'm cutting it from the left side, but this is from the rear of the feather. So it's actually a right. And the same with this goose secondary. And on this fly, I'm putting the mallard on the bottom, both sides of the tail. The illustration is fairly unclear. It's as if the fly was maybe an antique fly and the tail got kind of messed up. So the mallard appears to be on both sides, but I doubt it was really that way in real life when it started. I'm going to straddle the hook, take 2 very soft wraps, not tightening at all, and then lift both the butts and the tail. And that gets it right up on top of the hook. Man, that looks pretty good. Once I get a little thread torque going, it'll be perfect. As I bind down the butts here. Now I'm cutting the butts off at an angle so that I'll have the most bulk in the middle, and this helps with the taper I want on the fly. These old flies had fairly robust bodies. They were pretty thick. And when I say old, this fly was probably circa anywhere from late 1800s all the way up to maybe 1930s, mid-1930s, they were doing flies like this. And they fish these flies a lot on lakes and in rivers as well, but a lot of Adirondack lakes in the east. Some of the Rangeley region, would be typical of a fly from that neck of the woods. There was a man in Keysville, New York, not far from where I'm from, who did flies in this style. And some of his work is in Mary Orvis Marbury's book. And tying in the rib material on the far side of the hook, flat gold tinsel. I really like to use metal tinsel if I'm doing an older fly. It's just traditional, but Mylar's fine. And if you use Mylar, tie the gold side against the hook if you tie in on the far side of the hook. It sounds counterintuitive, but it'll work out. I'm tying a single strand of Danville's red 4-strand floss. Red, Scarlet, not sure what it's called. I think it might just be red. The old Ibis color, just so you know, actually came from the bird, the ibis. And in the old days, they actually got feathers from ibis, from the birds themselves. And that color wasn't a rich red like this. Now, the color in the illustration of this fly was like this, and very quickly, tyers started to just use Scarlet instead of a true ibis color. True ibis has a little bit more It's a little paler, more a flamingo, close, sort of between a red and a flamingo color, pinkish, maybe even a little orange, a little yellow in it. But regardless, anything you see that says ibis, the red ibis is a famous fly in the Bergman book. They just used red, or scarlet. I'm really taking my time with this body. If you notice in a lot of these videos, I don't use a burnishing tool on the wets, or I try to wind a good enough body that I don't need to. Let's put it that way. Now, on a fly that I'm going to spend 10 hours on, a full dress salmon fly, I'll use a burnishing tool. But not so much on these. And this body really doesn't need it. Now, keep in mind, we're looking at this body under a lot of magnification here. This is a very good floss body. I'm very happy with it. If you saw the fly under normal conditions, the body would look perfect. Trapping the butts here before cutting them off. You don't have to do that. It's just something I like to do. Gives me that feeling of security, and I'm very insecure. This body's long enough. I'm probably going to do about 6 turns. The flies in this era didn't adhere as much to the 5-turn rule, which isn't a rule anyway. The 5-turn custom that became a custom later on. But in these days, if it was a long shank hook, I mean, you might see 12 turns of tinsel on it. It depended so much on what the tire wanted to do. Everything was very, very localized when these flies were tied. Very regionalized. And the world wasn't as small as it is now. So people made do with what they had, and they did whatever they wanted to do. And that's why you get a lot of flies like this that you can't find it. I defy you to find this in a book. It certainly isn't in none of mine. It's not in J. Edson Leonard's Flies. It's not in Bergman's book, Mary Orvis Marbury's book, Helen Shaw's book. I've got a lot of books, and I can't find this thing anywhere. But that's not unusual. I've switched to black thread here, and I'm getting ready to put a hackle on. This fly has quite a bit of hackle, as the old flies did. The word sparse, I don't think, appeared till about 1930 or so. The old flies were bushy. Back to what I was discussing before, a lot of people send me flies for identification or pictures of flies, and my batting average is terrible on them. Flies back then just weren't standardized in any way. Always bind down hackle by the tip with at least 6 firm wraps of thread. You don't want it to pull out as you're winding. It's just annoying. And I like to fold the hackle as I wind, not ahead of time. You can do it ahead of time if you so choose. It's just not easy to do. It's much easier to do once it's on the fly. And I'm going to do quite a number of wraps here, quite a large number of turns. I think this hackle might be one of those whiting American hen hackles, which are very dense and perfect for this fly. I can't swear to it because I dyed this myself, and I'm just thinking that's probably what it is. I buy all my hen hackle in white and dye it up myself as I need a given color. Dyeing is incredibly easy to do, and I promise in the near future I'll do a short video on dyeing materials. I avoided dyeing stuff for years, and now I'm just kicking myself these days because it's so simple. It's just handy to be able to go down and quickly dye a few things. Now on this fly, I'm going to pull the hackle down, and I'm also going to strip some of the fibers off the very top so that my wing will go on nicely. You don't have to do this, and it's possible to overdo it, but I like doing it. I just get better results when I go to mount the wing. If your wing consists of material like turkey or something stiffer, it's less of a problem, and you don't necessarily have to do this quite as much. With mallard, teal, or wood duck, though, it really helps. I just don't like to have hackle sticking up above the equator of the hook. Now, some of the old flies, and I couldn't tell from the illustration on this fly, but some of the old flies, the hackle's actually wound in front of the wing, and I could have done that here, and maybe in retrospect I should have done that here. I don't know, but this I'm feeling pretty good about this. These are left and right mallard flank feathers. I selected out two that were similar, and I'm tying them both on at the same time. And this is not a particularly easy process. There are other ways to mount a flank feather wing, but this is maybe the nicest way. At least and as far as this fly goes, it had complete. The one in the illustration has complete wings. Here's another way you can do it. You can fold a feather and just tie it on in a bunch. That's the way I'll do, like, for instance, on a wood duck fly like the light Cahill wet. I'll tie the wing on like that. But here I just use two complete feathers, a left and a right. And it takes some selecting to get a couple that match. These are called splits, kind of go up the side of the fly. I like to parallel along the stem, and there's a split for each side. This split was the first split. The near split's cut from the left goose secondary, and the far one's cut from the right goose secondary. The far one, you want to mount it as high as you can get it on the hook. You can see I'm even pulling it up a little bit. And they went on really, really well. This is not difficult. It does help to have a vise that spins around. Especially with the far wing. But it's very doable without a vise that spins around. Everything is very doable with just an ordinary plain vise. You can do any of this. But it's a convenience to have the full rotary feature. I like to do a whip finish that goes the full length of the head. And many times I'll try to just get additional coverage if I haven't gotten enough coverage winding up. Go ahead and cut the thread tag with a single blade of your scissors, and we'll have a look at the fly. Turned out well. I'm going to frame it and give it to the owner of the cigar shop. I think he'll get a kick out of it. And maybe someday it'll be in the bathroom itself. Who knows?